Hello, everybody. Yes, scroll down a little bit. Yes, please. Before we start this session, I would like just to make an announcement. And for the session tomorrow in the morning, 9 o'clock, I would like just to make sure that you know that there is a farming. Well, let me point it. Up here. There are two sessions and separate sessions, and they are at two different rooms. So please take note. Okay? Thank you. And now we can put up the presentation.
Are you guys going to sit on the panel?
Yes. Well, yeah. Well, I think we can sit afterwards for questions. Yeah. The before last, down. Yes. Okay. So welcome to the session on Earth observation, exposure, and feature extraction. My name is Daniele Ehrlich, and I'm coming from the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. So I would like just to introduce this session by telling you that we will have three speakers. And I will just introduce the session and give you an overview because I feel I should report to you some of the issues discussed in the forum, in the online forum. I think they deserve attention, so I will provide that. And the three presentations are from space to ground, current trends and capabilities of remote sensing, delivered by Mark Lucas, exposure database development at different accuracy level by Inder Claire, and then state-of-the-art information techniques delivered by Guido Lemoine for the GRC. So we would like the important is that we will have 15 minutes presentation and each panelist, and then we will have the questions saved at the end. Since we are also online, I think the questions may come in via Twitter, and then they will be written down and will be read to you. So if I feel, though, that since we have a relatively small audience, the question of this room can be asked directly over the microphone, okay? So we'll have a timekeeper, and I think we are almost ready to start. Yes, so actually I will provide an overview. Okay, so I would like just to dwell on this slide that you have seen before, just to tell you why are we using Earth observation. So it is really to map exposure. This is the topic of this presentation here. Now, exposure is, in this case, it's the building stock. We see the 3D building. But I wanted also to say that the reasons why we are doing it is really because, oops, hold on. It's because we want also to, maybe I should have a microphone. Hold on. Can you hear me? Yeah. So it's also because with satellite imagery, you can get 3D information. For example, you can get also landscape information that are extremely useful for hazard modeling, for example. So with 3D, you're not only getting the building height, you can get also the 3D. There's some timing on. I will not dwell on this. This is the second presenter, Mark Lucas, will tell you all about satellite imagery and future trends. So for us, physical exposure, for us coming from the remote sensing community, is really about the building stock. So the building stock, the important thing we have heard also in the CAPRA session this morning is about where the buildings are, how big they are, the sizes of the buildings. And of course, you need to tell something also about the vulnerability of these buildings. So I feel that the remote sensing is good for identifying the buildings, locating them, measuring the size. Not so good for qualifying the buildings. For that, I think you can do something with the remote sensing, but it's probably other technologies can be of use, and then eventually somebody has to give the final decision of what the building is all about, and probably this is a civil engineer. I just wanted to tell you also about this global settlement maps, because they have come into this forum discussion. There have been, there's a lot of discussion about also within GEM that will be taking place tomorrow about global settlement exposure. And I think the global settlement map is a good proxy. So we'll tell you about global and regional a little bit. And then the more detailed urban land use map and building stock maps will be more covered by the third presenter in the clear. So let me just tell you a little bit about this global built-up map. I think some of you, especially if you're coming from the remote sensing community, are familiar with the night lights that have been used also to produce the global rural-urban map of the world. But I think there's one new product, which is the MODIS at 500 meters, which has been just released maybe 1 month ago. And I think that product deserves attention. That will be interesting to understand from you if that product could be considered for other global settlement map. Here we show just an example over one island, which is in the Caribbean, Guadeloupe, where on the top left we have the reference map made of building footprints. Just to say that MODIS could be used to at least to identify the very high concentration of built-up in the world. I will tell you also, there has been discussion about the continental urban land cover. I think we have been exposed to Africa cover, for example, the Korean land cover in Europe. There are urban land cover for the North America. I have learned recently there is one also for India, so it's very good. And the fact for the remote sensing specialist is always very difficult to understand how this map should be derived. Because in this case, for example, you have in pink the built up, and you can see there is a continuous gradient of built up density. And then that has to be mapped in categories. Where to draw the line is the big question. And it's an important question if you have to produce a product over large areas, continents, and those maps have to be comparable. Then it becomes an important issue. So what we have learned is there is no really automatic method that allows you to do that over the entire globe. Otherwise, probably we would have it already, since Landsat is available globally. So, as I say, it's also not easy to define the legend and to define a class within a legend. And for that reason, it will be also difficult to validate. But if available, probably it should be considered also for as a proxy for exposure, if available. So I think what we are so happy now in the last 10 years is that we have the very high resolution satellite imagery that are really incredible, have changed the way we are doing remote sensing, because we really can see every single building, and out of that you can make, for example, an urban land use map, like the one I'm showing here. This is Nairobi. It is, I think, the disaster risk community, I think, is familiar with this. What the remote sensing community would like to understand is really how to define those classes. And is there a legend or a classification scheme for urban areas that could be used? That would be interesting for us to understand. So the imagery, as you see from this, can tell you very much about the city. You can see the very dense area, in this case, is as an informal settlement in Kibera, in Nairobi. At the same time, you see different patterns. And those patterns, these urban patterns, you can tell very much from the very high resolution imagery. If you go at the coarser resolution, and this is an spot imagery, probably you can still see very well certain patterns, but other patterns are much more blurred. And again, the question comes again, where do you draw the line if you make a land use map? And this is an raster image over the same area. So these are some of the questions that we, remote sensing community, have been addressing. But we would like to get guidance also from the disaster risk community on what urban classes to define. In terms of what imagery to use, we have probably a simple rule. Some of us have a simple rule. If you are able to identify and draw the footprints of the building, probably you can do lots. You can derive lots of products. If you are on the upper scale, coarser resolution, then probably you can derive only certain type of products, probably more urban land cover, and in that case you suffer from what I just mentioned before, it's difficult to define what a given class is. In the online discussion, we have also discussed the different feature extraction techniques. For example, what I'm showing here is object-oriented. It has been started to be used, especially with the very high resolution imagery. Object-oriented is the semi-automatic that allows you still to segment the image quite efficiently, but still you have to be there and then decide where every segment of the imagery has to go. But it has been used extensively by a number of researchers that have reported in the forum to map urban patterns within cities. In this case, it's informal settlements in cities. And this was kindly provided by ITC colleague. So built-up mapping. But as I say, if you have the very high resolution satellite imagery, then you can do so much. And I would like to introduce also the automatic detection of built-up areas in this case. So what I'm trying to say is that you can get every single building, but that is quite time-consuming and it has a cost attached to it. But you can also do it automatically. The product is simpler, but it's simpler, but it can be generated automatically. So you can go over large parts of the world in an automatic way. Of course, the accuracy still has to be properly taken into account. But I want just to show an example. This is again Nairobi, and we have the built-up map is a simple built-up binary map. Built-up is black in this case, and the city. As seen, the city that mapped in this way, it looks like this. And in my view, this looks very much similar to some of the picture we saw this morning in the CAPRA presentation. And so this could be a good, could be one way I feel that could be used for also exposure at city level, but that can be extended over also large areas, and it could be even done at the countrywide. So we have tested this over a number of cities, and here is just an example of the city, and it works quite fine. I would like also to then to tell you, ask feedback from you, and simply ask to what extent can image technology help in vulnerability assessment? And vulnerability assessment in this case is defining the quality of the building. From the satellite you can tell the size, you can get the height of the building, but what else can you tell? And the interesting part is what type of building types would you like to classify? So for example, we've seen today in CAPRA there are 5 or 6 building types that they're trying to get out. That's interesting, but there are other methods, for example, hazards that have 20 building types that they would like to get out. So I think is there a consensus on what should get out? Then also, if we are sticking to our urban land use map, then also how is the different classes of the urban land use defined? And as simple as that. And then should we use also satellite imagery to identify the use of the building? We know that, for example, industrial area can be separated from residential area and so on. Is this an issue for the disaster risk community? And then should the building stock or the urban land use also used to map human exposure? So there are lots of data sets of population available at core scale. Should those, or is there an interest of the disaster risk community in downscaling this type of information into more a fine scale information type? This is the question. And what else is there needed in the disaster risk community? So this was a little bit of my overview, which I wanted just to make sure that I take from the forum to you, because I think otherwise it would not get to you. And I would like just to thank the people that have contributed not only to the forum discussion, but also providing some of the slides in this presentation, and of course all the speakers of this session. So this concludes my presentation. And I would like now to invite the next speaker, which is Mark Lucas. This is Mark Lucas. I would like just maybe you introduce yourself.
Okay. I need some help there. Hi, just a little bit background. I come from a background from the Air Force and the National Reconnaissance Office, where we did a lot of satellite image processing and advanced remote sensing. Had a opportunity to found and run a company called the Image Links, where we did commercial remote sensing for about a half a dozen years, and lately have been mainly focused on business back with the government agencies and applying open source software to the whole business of remote sensing and geospatial processing. What I'd like to do here is just sort of give a 50,000-foot overview of remote sensing, where it came from, what some of the capabilities are, and where I think it's headed, especially with regards to assessing risk and earthquake damage and so forth. One way to think of it, you can sort of decompose the capabilities into spectral, spatial, and temporal capabilities of the satellite. Spectral, we all see, or most of us see, red, green, and blue. We see the optical bands, but the satellites have the capability to see what, in the case of thematic bands, half a dozen different spectral bands, or in hyperspectral cases, 200 bands, and do very detailed characterizations of materials on the ground. Spatial, of course, is the physical resolution of what we can see in those images. Historically, Landsat gave us very broad coverage. We could do land classification. We could tell urban areas from different types of vegetation or runoff areas. And temporal is how often can we get access to that spot on the ground. Most of the satellites up there, just because of orbital mechanics, maybe every few days we can get an image of a spot on the ground. Most of the newer ones, every day we can get a spot on the ground. They're typically constrained to 11 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the middle of the day. But there's a whole range of new sensors that are coming out that are giving us almost constant vigilance of spots on the ground. There's also other factors. In the case of optical, of course, is there cloud coverage? Can we even see what's on the ground? Historically, with Landsat, Spot, and so forth, there's been a lot of use for remote sensing for mining, oil, gas, for land characterization, and again, we see red, green, and blue, but up in the near infrared, there's a lot of very useful information. If we could walk outside and see near infrared, the vegetation would probably be about 10 times brighter than what you perceive optically. And stress usually shows up way ahead of time in those bands, and you can detect trends and so forth. Again, down in the hyperspectral sensors being used in oil, gas, and mining, there are scientific instruments and need a lot of calibration, but you can discriminate between types of vegetation and so forth and different types of materials. Synthetic aperture radar. The commercial world's really taken off in this regard. This is actually a picture of we're downloading virtually everything we can buy in terms of the oil slick coverage in the Gulf there, and we can get determined coverage of that because the radars, of course, don't worry about clouds, and they can you can see the black areas on there. There's also a lot of, since it is an active signal, there's all sorts of advanced capabilities like interferometry and so forth that can be applied to that, moving target indicators and so forth. We're sort of blessed. We're getting a lot of high-resolution commercial satellites up there. They're in the sub-meter range, and then on the aerial side, we're going to digital sensors. I'll show you some of that. And now on the ground basis. And this is the aerial of the Haiti relief camps and the type of detail that we're getting out of that. And just to give you an idea, we're talking about with the commercial sensors here. This is just Tampa as an example, but you get a very wide area of coverage, and you can go into any spot on that at half-meter resolution typically. And you'll see, as others have pointed out, we're getting what they call a nadir view, a bird's eye view, a straight-down view of what's there. So it's good enough to basically see the outlines of buildings. We can use this on a large scale to outline those buildings, maybe roughly categorize them, but as pointed out in some of the other presentations, in cases of earthquake damage, sometimes it's hard to see if they've collapsed or not, and you really need some ground truth or oblique shots on that. LiDAR is another sensor that was mentioned. This is an active, it's basically a laser that pulses on the ground, just lots of pulses, and you get actual measurements on the elevation or the height of the features. In the case of Haiti, this is what we call a change detection product, where day by day we would run these LiDAR products. The code is red is fled, blue is new. Anything you see in blue are new refugee camps. Anything that's red are departed refugee camps from the change detection of that. And that turned out to be pretty useful. These were aerial sensors that were flown at the time. And this is just a 3D relief of the same thing over in Afghanistan, showing all the details for the structures. I think some of the more exciting sensors are the aerial digital sensors. Pictometry and others have oblique camera mounts, and they do a single swath, and you get 4 shots to the front and sides and 1 straight down, and now there's automated software to stitch it all together in automated 3D models. And there's a lot of detail you can pull out of that. You can basically go in there and determine the types of buildings from that. And I think in terms of trends, this is where the whole technology is going to take us. We're going to just get to modeling with all these automated sensors and ground-based sensors, be able to put virtual models in 3D that will help us to get a much better orientation of what's going on in the ground, and attribute those with other sources of information to do better risk assessment as we go along. Trends of what we're seeing is, again, high-resolution, wide-area surveillance systems. There's all sorts of systems being put together. I've seen systems that are taking, hundreds of cell phone cameras and strapping them together and getting very wide, high-resolution systems. Of course, Predator and other drones that are given what we call persistent surveillance. They can dwell and see what's going on over a long period of time. We've already sort of covered some of the active sensors like LiDAR, synthetic aperture radar, and what's really going to happen is, and we're seeing it already, is that it's remote sensing ubiquitous. We're going to see it everywhere. In the case of Haiti, we saw what OpenStreetMap was able to do because everybody had GPS phones and could take snapshots and geocode it and easily put it into a database that's collaborative. We're all carrying around cell phones now that are sophisticated sensors in their own right, with attitude positioning and better cameras built into them. Working on a lot of applications where automated tagging and sending of those images back to a central database and automatic updating of those. So I think remote sensing always has used ground truth to validate what we've seen through the sensor, whether it's been Landsat, whether it's been the aerial sensors. And what we have unfolding in front of us is this crowdsourcing of that ground truth. And we'll continue to use the thematic sensors for very wide area coverage. I think in the case of earthquakes, we're going to see a lot of the commercial sensors giving us an overall view, but really for earthquake situations, we're going to have to get those aerial digital sensors in there, and we'll see a trend to really rely much more on the crowdsourcing and the feet on the ground and those optical sensors. And I think that they're going to be passing out. But there's we're very big on using open source software to do a lot of this. We work on a project called Awesome, which does remote sensing. It's all open source software, and those are the related links for that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, the next speaker is in the design, and please, if you can introduce yourself.
Thank you, Daniele, and good afternoon. My name is Inderjeet Clare. I'm from a company called RMSI in India. I'm going to be building on what Daniele and Mark have already talked about, which is using, thanks. Using remote sensing data to develop exposure database. We've done a lot of projects for the World Bank in different parts of the world on disaster risk assessment, hazard and vulnerability mapping, and these are some of the learnings that we have from there. Some of this stuff is familiar. I'm going to run through this fairly fast. That from an exposure database point of view, we need the quantification of the building inventory, how many buildings are there, where they are located, what are the types of these buildings, what are the uses that they're put to, what are the materials, the structures that they use. We also look at the features of the building, the quality of construction, what was the building codes that were followed, how well were they followed. And I want to make a distinction between the data that is available in the developed world versus the developing world. A lot more information is available about buildings and characteristics, both at government level as well as with the owners of the buildings. You can get floor plans for buildings, occupancy, everything. But in the developing world, a lot of that data is scarce. I want to talk more about the developing world. How do we get information that we need in terms of number of occupants of the buildings, how many floors are there, what is the usage for these buildings, what kind of costs would be associated with actually replacing these buildings or repairing them in the event of a natural hazard. We covered this. I want to skip through some of this stuff. We also need a lot of secondary data. Are these buildings retrofitted? We did a project in Romania for the World Bank where they already have a retrofit program going on. So you have original building characteristics as well as which of them are retrofitted, and the behavior is going to be different as we go across them. The vulnerability state would change. The cost of replacing these buildings in the event of a natural disaster, so it's a function of the total built-up area and the cost per unit. These costs typically you can get from interacting with the building and construction industry in that part of the world, or you could use standards which apply in that region. The data that we look at and what I'm going to talk about is actually two components. One is the basic land use, as Daniele and Mark have already talked about. And then how can you take that land use information and actually get exposure relevant information out of that. We do land use classification at 4 different levels. I'm going to use India as an example to talk through this. Level 1, which is what we do at country level assessments using 30-meter, 50-meter kind of resolution imagery. Do classification from that. Level 2 would be for the cities, which are more dense, so you have 5-meter resolution kind of data from there. Level 3 is where you're actually getting down to clusters of buildings or groups of buildings which have similar characteristics, which are within the dense areas of the cities. And level 4, which has also been talked about, is actual individual 3D building footprints with height, with other information that can go with that. So here is a map of, I think I skipped a slide now. This is good. So at level 1, we're looking at, it's actually Delhi. On the left is a level 1 map of Delhi, 30-meter resolution land use classification. On the right is a 3D map of a portion of Delhi, individual buildings with heights and characteristics. So this is a map of India that we have created. I think we have data for about 60 countries at this resolution that we have done. A lot of this work has been done for mobile phone companies or governments or everything where land use is one of the pieces of information that they need. This is the map for Delhi. As Daniele mentioned, how do you classify? What are the land use classes to take? Most of this is customer driven. We've had discussions with the client in terms of what is the land use that they are interested in, what are the classes that matter to them, and how exactly are those classes defined. This can be tailor-made. There is no standard right now, but depending on the requirements and for different parts of the world, you can actually come up with a standard land use classification using the same sensor. Just a quick example on how this is done. So at 30-meter resolution, you can actually see that the built-up areas show up as cyan-colored pixels. They have different features and textures. I've highlighted some of those. They can be classified as urban, semi-urban, or rural based on the density and the size of these clusters that we have. So urban areas would be larger collection of this kind of pixels. A semi-urban would be this interspersed with some open spaces. Rural would be agricultural land surrounding some buildings. At level 2, you get into more detail. So one of the questions that was asked in a previous session this morning was, how do you get an exposure database for the whole world? If you actually do it at higher resolution, that is very time consuming and very expensive. So what would probably be a better option is to do low resolution, and then for the urban areas do medium resolution, and then overlay the hazard layers on top of that, and the areas that are identified as being at risk, you could do a more detailed assessment for those pixels. From 5-meter resolution, this is the kind of analysis you can do. So you can again get more details out of it. And then from an exposure calculation point of view, from the land use, this is one of the methods that we use. This is for residential buildings. All the boxes in green is actual data that is available. All the boxes in blue are values that are proxies taken from secondary sources or from discussions, so the rate of construction, for example. And all the red boxes is actually calculation. So you can end up with a total economic exposure value at administrative unit level. Typically, when we do these kind of assessments, we are looking at the smallest possible administrative unit that we could do it at, district or county, aggregate up to the state, aggregate up to the national level from there. The calculations for commercial and industrial buildings would be similar, but would have some additional parameters in terms of nature of business, number of employees, things like that. So this is again further breakup of Delhi with more land use classes. The higher the resolution, the more you can differentiate. The point that Daniele made, the borders become less blurred as you go into higher resolution imagery. So that's what you can capture from there. Skip through that. A lot of this data, especially in the developing world, will need secondary information. This is typically either available in the census. In Romania, for example, there was actually a building census by commune, which listed all types of buildings in each commune, so it was easy to do that. Otherwise, this would need to be classified from other sources. As we get into a higher resolution imagery, you can also see the heights of the buildings, so you can start classifying them based on the number of floors. And then at the highest level, which is in dense urban areas which are at high risk, this is what we would recommend. You can see individual buildings, you can get the building heights and footprints. What we could also do is, Mark had already mentioned, you could use oblique imagery, and just using a single oblique imagery, you could still get something like 80 to 85% coverage of the buildings that are there. With stereo, you could go up to 95%. Also, if you're actually doing this and you have the stereo imagery, you can use the same stereo processes to get a higher resolution DEM. Again, in most parts of the developing world, DEM better than 20 or 30 meter resolution is not available. But if you're using stereo satellite imagery, you could actually get to a higher resolution DEM as well. So I'm going to finish on this slide, which is basically all the information that is captured from a mix of remote sensing as well as field and secondary data. And if you have that, go out into the field, collect some photographs and calibrate the actual data, then you can rerun the tools on the imagery itself and come up with a detailed exposure database for the area, starting from country level, going down to individual building level, and integrating that into a single exposure database. Thank you.
We have one more speaker now, and it's Guy Lemoine, information extraction from remote sensing.
Yeah, that's fine. The third one. I don't see it here, but okay, fine. So I'm trying to add to these three presentations more on with a focus on the processing that is needed. So not too much in detail, but just giving you some elements of what is possible in this automated area. So I'm talking about processing of this very high resolution imagery, VHR. You see this term quite often, which usually means that you talk about imagery that has a resolution of 1 meter or better. We talk about automated processing. In the next slide, I'll explain what the difference is. So basically, machine-driven processing mostly, and we're focused on building presence, build-up area, some characterization of build-up, and also some of the 3D aspects. And I have a few slides also on the use of SAR. Again, very high resolution SAR. So what kind of processing we talk about? I think you've seen some examples before. You have basically the more manual work, things we also, for instance, did in this damage assessment in Haiti, where you have a lot of interpreters that look in compare the pre and the post imagery, and then mark what they see in the scenes. So very manual, labor-intensive work. Can also use, of course, more sophisticated imagery like pictometry. Then there is what Daniele showed before, this segmentation followed by grouping, so semi-automatic, where you let the machine do a lot of grouping, but you still have to have at least some control, some additional work to group this information. And what we're talking about in this particular presentation is really about letting the machine do most of the work, and of course standardized workflow that you can then implement on machines. You've seen some of these examples before. So in our group we are working on two lines of methods. One is based on morphology, so looking at shape information. It actually deploys not just the radiometry, so the spectral information in the imagery, but also the spatial correlation, the changes in the local area of the image to determine shape and size, and the kind of information you get from that is individual buildings, groupings of buildings, but also shape and size parameters, and in a mostly automated fashion. And what's interesting is of course that you can apply that to full city scenes. And the other line of work is more texture-based. This is ignoring, or at least not using a lot of the radiometry, but purely looking at what we call higher order statistics to look at variation in the scene and derive that. This is giving you this coarser product, which is like the build-up mask, yes, no, urban area, which you can more easily apply across large image sets. So, of course, the detail of the method has a certain cost in terms of processing, and gives you a different kind of image. This is also something that Daniele showed. You can do this easily for complete urban scenes, scenes that are in the end relatively large, but you can apply this method relatively constantly over different cities across the world. There are then this computational challenges, of course. I mean, this is, after all, very large, relatively large volume. You talk about, if you look, for instance, at the current state-of-the-art high-resolution imagery of about 0.6 or 0.5 meters, then a typical city scene is easily 4 gigabytes or larger. And for instance, if you look at the airborne data sets that were made available for Port-au-Prince after the Haiti earthquake, then you already talk about easily about more than hundreds of gigabytes of data. So it's a very large volume of information. Apart from the data assess, you have the problem, of course, to process this quickly if you want to integrate that in an operational exercise like a damage assessment or a emergency support to emergency response. ways to tackle this. I mean, you have actually, you need the processing power to handle this kind of volumes, and there are different ways, of course. You can work on the complexity of the algorithms that you use, things like optimization, linearization. And what is increasingly being available as well is the use of clustered machines. So you basically cluster the say increasingly powerful CPUs that you may have in a team, and let them work on this data. Say developments in parallelization are also becoming more common. Another interesting development is currently the use of graphical processing units. So we actually use the graphical cards, advanced graphical cards, that are relatively cheap but are very performant. So they you can have performance in the order of what I'm stating here in the end. So around up to 1 gigabytes per minute quite easily, which are then again within a realistic order if you want to process these large volumes. Both, in fact, in what we usually call the reference mode, so where you do things that are not urgent, but also in cases, for instance, in the case of Haiti, where we were doing damage detection semi-automatically using these kind of approaches. So it is realistic that you can handle these kind of volumes in the time frames that you need. This is another example. We work with the World Bank on Guatemala. We have an almost complete orthophoto coverage of that country, which is about 2 terabytes of data at a half-meter resolution. And the purpose here is also to produce an urban characterization of the country and integrate that in a risk assessment. And we use basically the same setup, the same computer power to address this, of course, in slightly longer time periods, but achievable at that resolution. This is an example of multi-tile part of that mosaic, and just a blow-up of an example where you can also, again, derive the relevant settlement information for the structuring of the exercise. That you can integrate back into your imagery as enhanced, images themselves, or of course make available as digital features that you make that you can then integrate in any kind of GIS environment for further modeling or processing. Other areas of our work focus more on the characterization of urban patterns, so where we again use structure, shape, size, but also occurrence of, for instance, vegetation to typify urban areas. This is just showing an example of how you use what we call vegetation indexes, so where you look at occurrence of vegetation as an indicator of density in urban areas, and use that information then again to characterize the city areas. That again has led to this idea that we are trying to make this, you can derive a lot of this information, extract a lot of this information that you can then make available as training sets, so people can use this information to look at what they would consider typical urban patterns, and then match them against data that they have available themselves. So it can actually be developed into something that is could be used as a classification tool, and then based on the areas of interest, you could tune this tool to give you the information that you are looking for. Just a quick word on stereo images. So we already saw some of that. So again, stereo processing is you have the same image more or less, but from a slightly different angle. Well, this is mostly focusing on satellite stereo, but you of course also have airborne stereo. So the matching of that is largely automatic as well. Software exists to do this. And of course, the purpose of this exercise is to look at the third dimension, so to try to get the height information out of the imagery, and then as much as possible automatically integrated in the information. This is a typical example what you get out of a satellite stereo. So you get a digital service model that if in case you have the footprints available of the buildings, allow you to extract also the building height. And that allows you then to make nice visualizations, but this one is also integrated in a risk modeling study. This is Alexandria in Egypt, an area very exposed to a number of risks, tsunami risk, but also flooding from the river areas, and also a number of general hydrology problems and subsidence. Similar measure before that. The more basically this slide is showing that the more detail you need, the more precise your information has to be. The larger your effort becomes, the less automatic it becomes if you go towards the right side of this slide. So it depends. It's a decision you have to make. The data is more or less. Say that the technical capacity to collect this information is available, and you have to, of course, decide on your typical case how far you want to go in this schema in terms of money, effort, and detail. And similarly, what Mark was also showing, this idea of this increasingly available idea of having your city models available. Is also a question of how far do you want to go in the realism of that, and how much effort you want to actually put into this. I mean, of course, this is becoming increasingly automated, but I think the current availability of this information is not as widespread as we would like to, especially if you consider, of course, maybe the non-Western economies where this data is not yet so widely available, but of course has a great potential. Just a final word on SAR processing. In very high resolution SAR, you also have a possibility to look at these texture-based urban maps. Again, requiring a fairly high resolution, which is only available since a number of years in the public domain. It's just since 2 years, I think, that you can get TerraSAR-like and Cosmos SkyMap, so 2 European SAR systems, in fact, that give you SAR data at up to the 1 meter resolution. So between you have actually a series of options there. And the interesting part, of course, in the 1 meter range resolution, you can start doing interesting things also with the use of SAR. This is just to give you an impression of how it compares to a similar resolution optical. So on the left side you have in fact an airborne image of an urban area in Germany, and the equivalent is on the say the SAR image of the same area is on the right. And well, the main message here is that there's a fundamental problem or there's a fundamental aspect to SAR image formation that is very different from optical. So it's not so easy to transfer your knowledge that you may have in the optical domain straight into the SAR domain. But there are ways to look at this problem, and one way we have actually been exploring in our team as well is to use SAR simulations. So you start with some, for instance, building outlines from the SAR from the optical image, then use simulation for the height, and then see if you can match the signature that you see in your SAR scene, and of course derive from that the actual height. Now this is a semi-automatic method. It is quite of course a lot of work to do this, but it is a possibility that has been we also been applying in the other direction. So where we had imagery over the recent China earthquake, not the most recent one, but the one from the Sichuan, so the 2008 earthquake, and we use this methodology to basically detect collapsed buildings, so buildings that were no longer giving the signature that you would have expected on the basis of its estimated height. So again, it's quite a sophisticated method, but it is not as easy as you would expect to work with, for instance, optical data. So conclusions, these processes are giving you this build-up information at scales that are in this order of magnitude, so 1 to 25,000 is probably a very useful, widespread quality that you would want to use in exposure information. It allows you to generate also settlement maps at the city and country level. The methods applies to either satellite or airborne data, either citywide or countrywide. Our aim is to get more consistent information at global level, especially, of course, for the large urban settlements, the large metropoles and the important areas, of course, say prioritized by risk exposure. And then, of course, in those cases, as suggested before, of course, if you need higher value information, you can start using the more precise information, including stereo, including ancillary data that allows you to generate higher quality information. And in some cases where you have difficulty obtaining this kind of information, you may consider very high resolution SAR, taking into consideration that it does require additional expertise. That is the end of my meeting, my presentation.
Thank you, Gordon. Okay, so we just wanted to give you an overview of the satellite imagery available there. That was the presentation of Mark. Type of products that can be generated. There was the presentation of Inder, and the feature selection techniques that are now state of the art. And this was Guido. So now, if you don't have any written, do we have any written question? Any question coming from Twitter? Not yet. So, yes. So I will. Then I would like to propose that the panelists sit on the chair, and then we need initiate the question and answer session. Okay. First question, please.
One technique that I haven't heard mentioned is PSINSAR, which is being used mostly for detecting and tracking deformation. But the fact that permanent scatterers are generally buildings, I'm wondering if it might have an application in counting up building stock.
Is this for Guido?
The INSAR, the use of INSAR is actually quite specific to look at the change in heights in buildings. It's a bit more difficult, especially in dense urban areas. There's quite a few problems in actually deriving individual building height directly from INSAR, especially because until recent INSAR was at a coarser resolution. You have this, what we saw this morning in the Haiti presentation where they show the displacement map after the earthquake. So you look at displacement over very large areas.
I'm not talking about conventional INSAR, specifically PSINSAR.
That's a permanent scatter, but the idea behind PS INSAR is to look at individual permanent scatterers in, for instance, city areas, but mostly to follow change in height over time. So it is not really specific to urban or at least building delineation. So it's a little bit, it has a different kind of application.
What I'm thinking is that before you can track the movement of the buildings, you've actually got to detect the buildings.
Not necessarily, no, because it's based on permanent scatters, whether these are buildings, but there's lots of artifacts that also cause permanent scattering effects. So it can be corner reflectors, it can be different, artificial targets. So it does not really have to be a building. But of course, knowledge of the kind of target that gives you a permanent scattering behavior is important. But you would not need to understand exactly how that is causing that formation.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Any other question? Yes, please. Sorry. Sorry. You...
Thank you. I'm Ole Nielsen from the Australian Government Agency for International Development, and we are really interested in this kind of work for our work in Indonesia, for example. So I've got two questions. Firstly, do you have any sense of the reliability of automatic feature extraction? Are we talking 40% or 60% for finding building footprints, for example? And secondly, are any of these tools available as open source?
Can you microphone on? Can you hear? Yeah. So reliability, maybe from the built-up areas that we showed, I showed briefly those 40 cities. The accuracy there ranges between, say, 80 and 90. So with top 95. But in that case, so you always have some cities that work less better than others. So, but that is the order of magnitude, yes. And the second question is probably soon.
True, there's a tool called OTB. It's called the Orfeo Toolbox, which is a development in open source development in remote sensing, and it has texture modules and morphology modules that you can use to derive this kind of information. Whether they are optimized to handle very large volumes is maybe an issue, but again, these are algorithms that you can in principle also parallelize, and so if you put in some effort, that would be a possibility. Yeah, that is.
No, I'd echo that. OTB is very good, and of course there's the GRASS software that's been around with all the traditional classification and analysis.
Okay, we have one here and one there. Then. Yes.
Hi, I'm Ed Parsons from Google. It's not a technical question, but probably a question of considerable interest. What are the issues around the licensing of data that you extract from satellite imagery? I think around Haiti, largely most of the imagery providers for that particular issue moved away from any requirements to have data licensed under normal circumstances. But obviously to do this on a more long-term process and to make this sustainable, clearly the licensing of the data that you extract from imagery will become a problem, and the cost potentially of licensing that data. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah. The imagery has been acquired from the imagery providers, either on behalf of the customer, or the customer has provided it to us, or we have acquired it ourselves. We have processed it in-house and delivered the data in whatever format, whatever tools are available with the client. We have had cases of customers coming back and asking for updates every 6 months or every year, depending on how much urbanization, how much development is happening in those areas. And each time new imagery is acquired and new imagery is processed. So it's a one-off license for the data that's been created.
I'll just add, I think that's always been a challenge. Back in the old Landsat days, it was several $1,000s an image. Now that's freely available. I think the general trend is it's becoming more and more a commodity. Yet it's still very expensive to launch and maintain the satellites. So I think we're seeing in the U.S. where now the government's stepping in and bulk buying a lot that sustains the business model for the commercial satellite providers, and especially in disasters, everybody releases it I think the challenges for upfront analysis and repetitive analysis. How do we get to a price point that's viable for that?
I think in general also the license allows you to, if you derive information that is not, say, reversible into the original product, including maybe downscaling of the resolution, but so processing the information in such a way that you can never get the original data out of it, that is actually allowed under the normal licensing scheme. And so derived information is usually not covered by that particular restriction.
And listening to this is kind of interesting because we were, just to put this at the highest level, we're the prime contractor to the UN for the supply of 7 sensor satellites, 5 optical, RadarSat 1 and RadarSat 2. During the Haiti crisis, Digital Globe and GeoEye both offered the data through the UN. We had a call from the UN Cartographic Service to me, I think January 13th, asking if we could request from Digital Globe and GeoEye any data that was available. So I can't remember how much GeoEye provided, but I think Digital Globe covered Port-au-Prince at least 3 times fully and virtually all of the country. I think it was about 7 terabytes of data. Getting to the licensing aspect of it, this is interesting. Derived means like an ortho product. So if you do an orthorectification of an image and the pixel values are nearly the same, or you maybe move that pixel a little bit, that's a derived product. That cannot be provided to, that would be an additional license. If you do a value added, which is extracting vectors or a bitmap or something that doesn't have the original data values, that you can give freely. And we also had done a project recently, it was funded partly through the World Bank, Government of Australia, it was in the South Pacific, where the data were actually, the value added work was done elsewhere, but the licensing was such that the CDs or DVDs could be shipped to wherever the value-added work was done with the promise that the data would be deleted. That worked out fine. So there's a big important separation here between derived and value-added. For an MDA, for a RadarSat 2, we're very, very tight about what's a derived and what's a value-added. So if you cross a line, then it's you're buying a multiple-user license, which changes the price of the data. So I'm speaking also on behalf of John Roos of Digital Globe, who is here. Some of you may have seen him, and also on behalf of GeoEye, who I don't think there's any representation here. Thank you.
Would you consider automatic feature extraction a derived or a value-added product?
Well, that would be a bitmap, something that doesn't have the original pixel value, so it would be binary. That's fine. So if you're doing a feature extraction, extracts rasters, then you do a raster to vector, clean it up. That doesn't have the original pixel values, or again, the derived, whether you're doing an ortho, downsampling, it all falls into that derived product. So you can't just say, oh, it's half meter to start with, we're going to downsample it to 1 or 2 or whatever you want. It's still a derived product. You have to stick with the value added. So it's fairly clear in the EULAs. Digital Globe EULA, I'd say, is my personal experience is a little bit clearer than the GeoEye EULA, but they both follow the same course. Other vendors are a little bit different.
Okay, I think it was an important clarification. Thank you. Yes, please.
I'm Keith Porter, University of Colorado at Boulder, and my question is about the limit of difference, identifying differences before and after an earthquake. We've seen images of buildings and trying to identify which buildings have collapsed, but another important post-earthquake situation is identifying those buildings that have not collapsed but are potentially collapsed, that have a significant collapse potential. Engineers need to go out and do red tagging of buildings, and it would be really valuable to be able to know which buildings have moved so that their roof is perhaps on the order of an inch displaced relative to the ground floor, or 1% displaced relative to their height before and after the earthquake. That's the difference between a building that needs to be that probably needs to be red tagged and one that is probably safe. Is that a current capability of remote sensing to see that small difference in an automated fashion very quickly?
I haven't seen that. For example, if you take LiDAR, and if you look at LiDAR closely, it looks like the models have been stuck in an oven and sort of melted around the corners, because you don't get the clean breaks at the edges of the building. So it'd be very hard, I think, to measure that type of fidelity. And I think to get to that type of capability, it's going to take some pretty accurate before and after ground-placed sensors or at least oblique cameras to be able to detect that kind of feature.
Well, maybe in theory, a repeat pass differential interferometry would have that capability, but I wouldn't really. I mean, first of all, it would be a very expensive way to do it. But I mean, they will. I mean, that kind of interferometry is able to measure in the order of its wavelength, which is 5 centimeters. So if you have fractional displacement of in the order of 5 centimeters, then in theory that would be possible. But this is basically the permanent scatter capability that you would. But then again, you need to have very high resolution SAR and the differential capability. So at the moment, it's not yet in space, something like that. But there's a tandem X SAR coming up. So this is what is it? It's basically 2 SAR systems that fly in formation to allow you to do more precise INSAR. But I'm not going to bet on that it would do this kind of measurement. But
Okay. The next.
So this is to follow on to the last couple of questions. I'm Katie Filbert, and I work on OpenStreetMap. And I know, like, it was, like, briefly mentioned, like up there, it's, like, first I want to correct some of, like, what was said. It is, like, on-the-ground mapping, but, like, a lot of it, like, nowadays is, like, done from, like, satellite imagery. And, like, in Haiti, that's how, like, I mean, virtually all of it was done. And then later, like, people, like, went there. But in order to make that happen, like, that was a unique situation where it made the headlines, and, like, we were able to graciously got imagery from Digital Globe and GeoEye, and then later, like, some aerial photography from, like, the World Bank and other organizations. But then, like, we had, like, the Chile earthquake, and there are other, like, disasters that happen that don't make the headlines in the same way. So we have a hard time, like getting access to that imagery, like, so, like, our users can do, like, what was done in Haiti. And then, like, the second thing is, like, we're talking about, like, preparedness. So, like, I know it was mentioned that in an earlier session about, like, say, like, a place like Panama City, which is, like, similar in many ways to Port-au-Prince, very vulnerable, and we would, like, totally love to, like, do what we did in Haiti, like, map it out, like, before, like, something happens. And I think that's kind of like what's, like, being done in Guatemala, but, like, to do that in other places. So what we really need, like your help and, like, the licensing, like, to allow, like, us to do what we do.
Thank you. I suppose it was a comment. Yes, thank you. Other questions? Please. Then.
Yeah. My name is Ajit Oak from Primo Consultants, India. My question is regarding the DEM data. I would be interested to know how easily is this data available and how high is high-res that is available currently as far as DEM is concerned.
The resolution of the DEM is actually a function of the imagery that you would use, and that then goes back to cost and time things. If you use a 1 meter resolution imagery, you would get a 2 meter DEM. If you use a 0.5 meter imagery, you would get a 1 meter DEM. Ballparkish figures like that. It's not readily available because of time and cost thing, but it can be created. I would say like a river basin area would probably take a couple months to do. That would be the
Sad, I'm sure you're aware there is globally available SRTM data that can be used as a base. Right.
Robin Spence, Cambridge Architectural Research. I was really impressed with the exposure data on Delhi, which our friend from RMSI showed us. But you produced at the beginning a very long list of desirable characteristics for the exposure data which you'd need in order to do risk assessment. What I'm interested to know is to what extent you get that kind of data. You mentioned that you needed to do some ground survey in order to collect that kind of data. I'd be interested to know how you go about that ground survey, what kind of input of effort it takes to produce a, let's say, level 3 assessment of a large urban area, and what kind of skills you need in that ground survey data. Is that the kind of thing that could be substituted by crowdsourcing methods, or does it need skills that the ordinary person in the street wouldn't actually have in order to help assemble that data?
The amount of secondary data actually varies by country to country where we are working in. So in India, because we are based in India and the Indian government does have a building inventory database for the country. In Romania, we could get from the National Institute of Statistics a building distribution. But in several other parts of the world, this has to be collected. It can be done through crowdsourcing because what you need is a lot of guiding on what is the kind of information we want people to provide us. It was mentioned in one of the other presentations that it's actually the engineers who could do the classification. So a photograph of the building, you don't need every building covered. If you do a sampling, that would actually help because the spectral signatures on the imagery are consistent. So we could actually pinpoint certain areas and say that these are the areas you need to go and get a sample for. Blocks of apartments in one area typically would have similar characteristics, for example. So it would need a little bit of supervision. Otherwise, it can be done generally. The luck part comes in as to how much data each of the developing countries actually already has. And as much of that as possible will improve the quality of it.
I guess I have a couple of I'll do a two-part question here. I'm Steve Arnold from Vandenberg Air Force Base. The spectral differencing aspect, I guess, given the fact that you have very little data in some regions of the world on specific building characteristics, how much utility have you gotten out of things like spectral differencing and stuff? You still need some of that additional data in order to get that to work for you. Is that true?
Yes. Do we have other questions? Maybe. Twitter, no question coming from outside now. So, yes, please go ahead.
My name's Ryan Engstrom from George Washington University. And just a quick question in terms of costs, in terms of like level 3 data, you showed India and you showed the multi-level approach. About how long in terms of man hours and person hours you're putting into something like that, and how about costs to do a whole country like India at the multiple levels, like for individual cities? And what size cities do you like focus on in terms of, do you consider large cities?
That's actually the reason that we do it at different scales, because doing level 3 for the whole country of India would take a couple of years of a lot of effort and a lot of money to do that. So the approach that we take is do level 1, overlay that with hazard maps and other maps. The areas that are of at high risk or of interest. For those areas, you do the level 2 and do that. In terms of costing, we normally do the pricing on a per square kilometer basis, where the imagery cost also is on per square kilometer depending on resolution of imagery and then the processing time. It's also a function of number of land use classes, number of vector classes that you want to extract out of it. I could give you some ideas on different types of it. I can share that with you. We actually have about 60 countries and about 3,000 cities at one of these resolutions that we have. So the pricing would be a function of availability of secondary data, availability of imagery, vintage of imagery, all of that. I'll give you some details offline. I would actually not know that off the top of my head, but if you were to do the level 1 for all of India, it would be, I would say, in around the $100,000 mark. Individual cities, the example of level 4 I can do is, we did all of Hong Kong and Kowloon at level 4, which was about $250,000 and took 3 months to do. Those are ballpark ranges.
Test. Lloyd Lynch, Seismic Research Center, Trinidad. To what extent is the exposure of buildings to, say, minor events, well, not very damaging events, being used to validate information that has already been calibrated? And is there a strategy within the community that is used to do this?
I think this is because it goes beyond me. I would not be able to answer this question.
I don't know, the question that you were asking, when we actually do the modeling, we do take the value of the buildings as an indicator of potential loss. What we also do to calibrate the model is actually go back and look at historical events and compare the losses reported versus that. That's one way of validating it. However, there are also with the actual reported data itself, is that consistent or not? But we do look at the areas of damage, the number of buildings damaged, and in historical events, so that we are sure that the models are predicting the correct things going forward. That's about all I could think of for that answer.
Just a quickie for the last speaker. What's the actual value in terms of increasing the detailed geometry of the structure in that one slide that you showed? If you go beyond a simple block shape, what does that do for you?
Well, I guess it's giving you further clues on to the value of the building itself. So the more detail you collect, the more precise you can actually estimate the say attached value to something like that. But it's, I mean, that slide was, I mean, it goes beyond just the exposure information there. I guess it just shows you that increasing the detail, increasing the effort is of course leading to higher say the higher demands for the input data and additional manual work. So that's I mean in terms of cost, that was the message of that slide.
How far do you actually go then in terms of when you're modeling?
Well, that is again our question back to the community, is that how far do you want us to go? So I mean, until now, I guess we do not go as far as suggested in that slide, but where circumstances would require this kind of information, it is technically it would be feasible. So, but that again, that is the feedback that we would expect from the risk community, is to giving these potential technologies. What would you want to have? At what detail? So same as the level 1 to 4. I mean, we can probably extrapolate that to level 6 if you want, but it has, of course, additional cost implications.
Any other question? Not. If not, I would like to close the session. Thank you very much to everybody, especially to the speakers. Please, a round of applause for the speakers. Thank you very much.